Oh, good evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I am so happy to be back with you again for another episode of BGC Book Club. I am back in my normal space, my normal studio, so I'm really excited about that because, as they say, there's no place like home. So please come on in the room, and whether you're watching this live or catching it in a replay, it's just an honor to have you here for what is actually going to be a very timely and powerful conversation, especially as we, at the time of this taping at least, we are in Black History Month. But how many of y'all out there know that Black history is 24/7, 365 days a year, or 366 in a leap year? So let's not forget that. But I am really glad to be here, coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, by way of Cleveland, Ohio, and a bunch of other places in between. So as you join in, if you don't mind letting us know where you're coming to us from, that would be great. So tonight's special guest is here to talk to us. Actually, it's a little bit different from the normal conversations that we have about story and books and things like that, a specific author with a specific story to tell. But this is about ways that we can empower our children through books and literature, and that is so important during this Black History Month and beyond. So we are going to be talking about Soul School, taking kids on a joy-filled journey through the heart of Black American culture. You see that? You see that beautiful book? I can't wait to get into it. Our special guest and the author is Amber O'Neal Johnston, who is a homeschooling mother of four, who speaks and writes as heritage mom about including diverse voices in traditional curricula and infusing culture into the home environment. She is the author of A Place to Belong and a regular wild and free homeschooling community contributor. So without any further delay, let's welcome Amber O'Neal Johnston to BGC Book Club. Welcome, Amber.
Hi, so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you here. You know, as I was telling you before we came on, I'm really excited about this book. I enjoyed reading it. I've told my mom about it because she's a former educator. So this is just really exciting for everyone who wants to learn about our history and our culture, and especially those who are educators and parents. So thank you for being here, and thank you for writing this book.
Oh, you're welcome. This definitely was a passion project, and I've told people a couple times that I feel like writing this book was worth like a whole bunch of therapy sessions because I cried and I got mad and I was happy and I just fell all in love with books all over again. Some of these stories that I had read before, so it was worth every moment.
Yes, it definitely is. And whether you're a parent or not, that's one thing I love about it, because I don't have children, but I was so inspired that there are books in here that I know I'm going to go and pick them up and read them or reread them if I read them as a child and all that sort of thing. So thank you. So what was the thing that inspired you to write Soul School?
Well, if we go back a bit, I started homeschooling my kids, and my oldest at the time, she was a little girl, like 5 or 6, and she was saying all kinds of concerning things. She started saying things like, I hate my curly hair. I want my hair to be straight. Why do I have to be the only girl with brown skin at this place or that place? And just over and over, she would say these things. And of course, I was like, that's not true. We're all the same. You're beautiful, so on and so forth. None of that was working. She wasn't trying to hear it. And ultimately, we got to a point where I went into the kids' playroom and all of the dolls were gone. And I looked closer and I noticed, okay, it's just the black dolls. They're gone. They're not in there anymore. And I asked her about it, and she didn't try to hide them. She was just like, well, I put them away. So I found them in the back of the closet that she shared with her sister at the time. And I asked her why she put them there. And she said she only wanted to play with the pretty white dolls. So this was very concerning to me. And I feel like in a lot of cases, we say, we blame things on schools. Like, well, I sent my kid to school and then this is what they came back with. But my kids had never been to school.
Right.
And where do I come up with my explanation? And I realized then that these ideas are so pervasive I mean, they're in the stores, they're all around us. And that you can't take a passive approach and just expect, I think her mom's black, her dad's black, she has her black siblings. Like, what's the problem? It
Right.
wasn't, because every time she left our house, she got these subtle and loud messages that told her that being different wasn't good. Or that, she somehow needed to blend in with what she saw around her. So I changed going in two directions. One, I realized I need to make sure that she had more Black people around her,
Right.
because part of her thing was about standing out and being different. And I was like, man, I need to make it so this kid is not always the only brown child in the place.
Right.
And so I started a 501c3 nonprofit homeschool group that is over 70 families strong now. It operates outside of Atlanta, and it's all Black families, and we're raising our kids together. So that solved that problem quick, fast, and in a hurry, almost immediately. And the other thing I did was completely change our home atmosphere. I took all the pictures off the wall and changed them. I changed the music we listened to, and most importantly, I changed a lot of the books on our shelves, the books that we were paying most attention to. We had a lot of Black books, but they weren't being honored in our home the same way the other books were. They were like extras, nice, like reading. But we had these other books that we were taking very seriously, and we were reading throughout the day and making a big deal out of them. So I changed our bookshelves. Eventually, I wrote a book, A Place to Belong, about all of the things that we were doing in our home and outside of our home to help our children feel rooted in who they were, so that they could spread wide branches towards other people. And there are 3 chapters in that book that deal specifically with books. There's a chapter of books as mirrors, a chapter of books as windows, and then a chapter on what makes a good book anyway. Like, who can decide that? And those were so popular. Everyone was just always asking me. I'd go to book clubs and all these things about the books, about the books, about the books. So Soul School was born from that.
Okay.
I was like, there's something here. There's a discussion that needs to be had, and that is, how do we take a serious approach to Black children's literature and elevate it to where it deserves to be, instead of just something you can read. Oh, you can just read this if you want to when you have free time. It's like, no, this is a must-have. And that's kind of where Soul School was born. The name came from the idea that these are the stories that touch my children's soul, and the stories have soul. You know what I mean? So it's like, people will automatically very quickly realize what I'm talking about, because I didn't want to beat around the bush. It is what it is, and I wanted people to know proudly that this is what this book is about. It's about Black stories that are good for the soul.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And I mean, wow, there's a lot in that story. So thank you for sharing it, just to give us even more background beyond just why you wrote the book, but the backstory behind the backstory. Because I'm thinking of, I can't think of the name of the of the people who ran the test years ago, the doll test.
Yes.
And
but
how
you think that's so long ago, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I was familiar with that,
40s.
but I wouldn't think that it would impact my kids. So imagine my shock when I'm like, did she really just do exactly what I had seen on that video, that old tiny video with that doll test? And then I felt really terrible. I was scared, but I also wondered, it caused me to have to turn myself inside out and look at myself, because what was it that I, as a Black woman, what was I not bringing to the table in our home that had her down that direction? And I think that I was very much in the state of color blindness. We're all the same, don't really talk about it. So we didn't really talk about being Black. We just kind of like we were, and we were happy with it, but it wasn't something we discussed. And I think what my daughter took away from that is there was nothing about her worth discussing. And so sometimes it's in our silence that we communicate a lot to our kids. And so I had to, look at all different types. And I know it's different for each person, but one thing that really bothered my daughter a lot was her hair. And she kept talking about it. And she also brought up the fact that when I kept saying your hair is beautiful, that's the way it's made, blah, blah, blah. She was like, well, how come you don't wear your hair the way it was made? And I was like, well, that hit me hard. You know what I'm saying? And I told her then, I was like, I'll never straighten it. You know, that's it. I won't do it anymore. I want you to see what my hair looked like. And I was scared. The next morning, I remember waking up like, what have I said? Because I didn't even know what my hair looked like. I had
Right.
been doing a relaxer right alongside Rudy on the Cosby Show, you know, since back in the day. So I
Hmm.
had no idea what my natural hair looked like, but I had to do that for her. And I mean, everybody's journey is different, but I couldn't tell her that it was okay to show up like naturally or show up and she was beautiful the way she was created and then not be able to do that alongside her. So my point is that to get into these stories with my kids, it wasn't about just picking up books and starting to read them. I had to evaluate how I felt about myself, and I needed to make sure that I could clean that up so that I could bring this forward authentically, just a pride and a joy in who I was
I
or who
love
I
that. I love that you did that. And I've heard similar stories of other mothers who've said, hey, I need to rethink because, what's the saying? Do as I say, not as I do.
yes,
And it's hard
yes.
to tell a child to do a thing or to love themselves in a certain way, but they don't see that reflected back in the one, who's teaching them or supposed to be teaching them and showing them how to navigate the world. So yeah, that is a thing just to think about that. So yes, the books, and it also speaks to, just culture in general and being able to see yourself. Because this is a conversation I've had with people before where they're like, oh, I'm just reading the book because it's good, or I'm just watching the movie or the TV show because I like it or I like the themes. But for me personally, I like to see some people who look like me. It might be really good, but there's something about feeling like I'm being represented. And that representation is so important, no matter how that representation shows up.
Yeah, and I explain that to people all the time. A lot of times people try to act like they don't get it when we talk about ethnic representation. And I said, no, you get it because it's that same excitement you get when you're reading a book and there's a scene that takes place in Atlanta. You know, if you're from
Mhm.
there, we live it's like, okay, ATL, you get excited. Or
Right.
the way that my kids feel when they're watching a movie or reading a book and one of the characters is homeschooled.
Mm.
Or if somebody has mentions a song and you're like, okay, I remember when that came out. You know what I mean? That feeling inside, that feeling of connection, that feeling of relations with or relationship with the things that are being mentioned. And because everyone's had that experience, I sometimes find it to be disingenuous when people say they don't understand why
Mhm.
we would feel that same way when we watch movies or read books or see performances that have people like us in them. Everyone has that feeling. It's just that we don't get it enough. And that's
Right.
why we talk about it a lot. So
Yeah.
I do think that's really important for children. And part of what I tried to do with Soul School is to say that um, books that represent Black children, they're very wide and
Yes.
varied.
Yes.
We get stuck in these like genres. It's like, this is a Black book. No, because we do what don't we do? There's nothing that we don't do. We do all that
Right.
stuff. So mysteries, fantasy, biography, nonfiction, coming of age, sweet picture books, young adult, teen, meaty books, with more mature themes, romance, all historical fiction, contemporary fiction, all of that. I want all of that to show up for our kids. And the book covers books from toddlers all the way through teens. So from about 2 all the way to 17. And
Mhm.
it was years in the making because
Right.
I read every book in here. There are
Wow.
120 books that I go really deeply into. I talk about why I selected this book, what it has to do with Black American culture. I give discussion questions and project ideas. And then my favorite part is called Second Helpings. And I think of that like a big soul food meal. Nobody just gets one plate. You're
Right.
going to go back for some more. And so the Second Helpings, for every core book, there are 2 book recommendations that go along with that book. So it's kind of like, hey, if your kid liked this book, I bet you they'll like these 2 as well. So the Second Helpings, maybe they have the same author, the same illustrator, or maybe they're set in the same time period or in the same city, or maybe the main characters are similar, or maybe they're going through similar circumstances. So it's up to the kids to kind of try to figure out maybe why I tied those books together, but they're
Right.
all related in some way. And so I think that that was really important to me. So, okay, the 120 core books plus the second helpings, that makes 360 books.
Yeah, it's a lot of books.
It's a lot of books. And then if you imagine how many more I had to read in order to land on these 360 as being like the best of the best,
Right.
it was just a really, I had to be very committed to this project, and I wanted to do it. All of the books are also written by Black authors, or a couple of them co-written, and that's a feat in and of itself,
It
because I
is.
didn't think, when I said I was going to do that, I pitched this to the publisher, I'm going to do this. But then when I started working on it, I was like, not Black author, not a Black author, not written
Mm.
by a Black author, not a Black author. So most Black children's books with Black characters are not written by Black people.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that took over 50% of the books off the table.
Wow.
Um, and that's kind of earth shattering
It
if you think
is.
about it.
It
It's
is.
really, I don't think people realize it. It's very shocking. So yeah, trying to find those hidden gems and trying to figure out why more of our stories aren't being told by Black authors,
Mm.
was a whole, this was emotional work,
Ooh, I can only imagine. And it would have taken a long time to do all of that because, in this book, and I have read it from cover to cover, y'all. In this book, as Amber has mentioned, it's the books, it's the second helping, so it's all these 360 books, but then there's also just other information which we're going to get into here momentarily, just some things that kind of set the stage for what the book is about. And you had to read, you had to research, there are quotes in here, there's a lot of work. It might look like a little book, it's small in size, but it's a reference. It's not just a one time thing that you read. It's a reference that you will want to go back to time and time again. So I love that. And just a quick sidebar, because one of the things that I do is once a week I go and volunteer at a local Atlanta school. We're both here in the Atlanta area for something called Power Lunch, where I go and read to a student for 30 minutes, just to help someone who's learning how to read. And I'm also in a sorority. So one of the things that we decided to do as a sorority chapter is donate books. And the first year we did that, we focused on just doing Black books by Black authors, because they have a cart, a library cart full of books, but very few of those books are either written about a Black child or written by a Black author. And even with all the ones that we donated, it's not. But then when you look at the children who are getting the extra help, a lot of them are Black children, Black
Yes.
and Black and brown children, but the books that are there don't really represent them.
Yeah. I think that's very typical. And I've seen that a lot in various circumstances, in some of the volunteering that I do with my children as well. And it extends into every area. I remember my homeschool group working with a local agency that has a store where foster families that are fostering children can come and shop like for free in this store. And I was telling her that we wanted to take up a collection, we wanted to collect something for the store. What did they need most? And she said, Black dolls and action figures, because here are
Mhm.
all these families coming into this store, and a lot of the children they're shopping for are Black, but none of the things that are available for them to play with are Black. And girl, I was like, you didn't say none but a word. My group took that very seriously,
Right.
and we came and brought it, and
Mhm.
I think that there has to be more of that, that we kind of take on and make happen for our community, because otherwise it doesn't. People who are donating usually buy things that look like them. And
Right.
so rather than the people that are receiving them. So we have to be really intentional about that. And definitely, when it comes to books, there are more and more Black children's books being written each year.
Mhm.
And I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, there's so many now. No, there's not. There's not even close to being enough. It's just that there are so many more than none. It used
Right.
to be none. So there's so many more than there used to be, but that's not the bar that we're trying to reach, just more. I mean, we need a lot of additional categories, and these books need to be taken seriously. If you look at some of the banned book lists that were either actually banned or books that were put up for being recommended for being banned, so many of them are Black books.
They are.
And the thought behind it, you know, the books that helped heal my daughter, you know, these books, I love my hair, you know, big hair, don't care. Those books were all put up. Oh, it's making someone's hair seem better than someone else's. But I think of all these books that, you know, we had in our home from these book lists that you're supposed to read with the kids. And it's like, oh, you know, she was skipping through the mountains with her grandpa with her long flaxen hair and crystal blue eyes shining in the sun. I mean, it was in so much that even when the book cover didn't designate that this was a book about white children, the descriptions inside the book took care of that.
Right.
And so I think to myself, because we write and speak about those things differently, ours are getting called out. But the descriptions, the physical descriptions of characters in most of America's favorite traditional children's books, and especially if they have pictures, but even the novels, make it very clear that these stories are not about us, not about our kids. So I think that when we see that this is under attack and people don't want these stories, they feel threatened by these stories, it has, you know, you're left to wonder, why would it make someone else feel threatened that a child feels good about themselves? And you can go deep in that. You know?
Yeah, well, we kind of know why we're not supposed to feel good about ourselves. So
that's right. And so Soul School was the antidote to that. That says, you know, parents can take control. You don't have to rely on a school board to agree with you. You know what your babies need, and you can provide that for them no matter what, if public school, private school, homeschool, wherever they are in any context. You are the ultimate educator as the parent. And yeah, I think that's kind of my goal and message.
Yes, as parents, as members of the community, kind of like what I was saying with donating books, because I'm thinking, you know, and I'll talk to you about it offline, but I have a plan because I want to get more Black books in certain spaces. But you think like there are little free libraries in different places, like putting Black books in there, or, you know, or maybe working with librarians and asking or requesting that they buy the books. Or sometimes some libraries you can buy the, you know, you can pay the money and let them buy the book. So there are ways, even as community citizens, we can do that to make sure that more books are even made available. Because the reality of it is there are people who can't buy a book for whatever reason, but if there are places where they can get them either free or low cost, that's to an advantage. So all that being said, I want to get into some of the themes in the book, because you have two different parts. And the first part of it really is kind of laying the foundation for what the book is about and some of the themes that you'll see in the 360 books that show up later on in part 2. So in the very first chapter, you talk about Black is beautiful, but Black is not just beautiful in, you know, how we look. It's beautiful in a lot of different ways. So just share a little bit about what you mean by Black is beautiful.
So this idea that the elements of our culture are beautiful. They aren't something to kind of sweep under the rug or maybe only pull out in Black History Month if you have to. This idea of our food, it's creative, it's special. There's something about it. I mean, and I love this idea that we call it soul food. Why? Because the food is so good, it touches your soul. It's not like anything else. It involves seasonings. It involves the food preparation. It involves also how it's laid out, who's giving it to you, and what they have to say about it. So I like share this definition in the book from Sheila Ferguson, who wrote a book called Soul School. And she says it's soulfully cooked food or richly flavored foods good for your ever-loving soul. But she says, but it doesn't stop there. It's a legacy clearly steeped in tradition, a way of life that's been handed down from generation to generation, from one Black family to another by word of mouth and sleight of hand. It's both history and variety of flavor. And I think every, Black families, we know that because you can try as you may, you just can't quite mimic so-and-so's
Right.
macaroni and cheese. You can't eat everybody's peach cobbler. It might not
Right.
be right. And so it's not just like a blank recipe that everyone's making. We put our own twists on things, and we like to hold them they're kind of proprietary, So if we share our special recipe with a family member, it's a way that we share love. We feast, really, not just the cold cut sandwiches, but we feast for funerals and births and weddings and graduations, and in good times and in the worst of times, we feast and we feed one another. And we do this even when we barely have enough. We always share our food. It's a way that we show hospitality and care and love. So that's just one example, but the chapter goes through all the other ways, like not all, but many of the other ways that our culture is beautiful. It talks about communication and language, and how a lot of the books in Soul School, I chose to include books where people are using, I call it Black English or Black vernacular English or whatever somebody wants to call it, because it's always being denigrated, not just by non-Black people, but also sometimes within the Black community. And I'm like, so there's no other people in the world that are bilingual that it's denigrated. It's always seen as being a wonderful thing, a brilliant thing, a beautiful thing, except for Black people. And so I think that idea that we can switch it up, you don't know, just in one conversation, we can go in and out, up and down, left and right. That is really cool. A lot of people cannot do that. And I love that it's not written down anywhere. So you can't take lessons. You can only learn to speak it from being with us. Deep relationship. That's how you learn it. And if you try to fake it, we'll call you out because it has rules, but you don't, they're not advertised anywhere. You learn the rules through sound and exposure. Like these are the things that are things that I think are important to talk about: hair, skin, and beauty sense. So books that address, yes, racism, but what about colorism? So in my family, my kids are all different shades. Like many Black families, we can come as light as the lightest white and as black as the blackest midnight and everything in between. And sometimes that happens with the same mom and dad. So here I have my two daughters and I have two sons. My two daughters could not be more different. And they feel that difference in society because of the way that people respond to each one of them in a different way. And I've raised the one that has a more traditionally beautiful, if you're dealing with a person suffering from colorism, the softer, looser curl that gets all cute when it gets wet, and the light skin and all that. I've taught her from a very early age, don't ever run into that compliment. They come for you, your sister's sitting right there. Don't gloat, don't feel good about it. It's not a compliment. It's not a compliment. It's basically them saying that the closer that we can get to white people, the better. And I gave them the history of it, why it's like that, where it came from. It didn't come from anywhere good. It came from pure evil. And so kids need to know what colorism is, and they need to appreciate our hair and all the wonderful things it can do. And so that's kind of what the Black is Beautiful chapter talks about: athletes and scientists and performing arts and music. I mean, you can't talk about Black culture and not talk about our music. It's like inside of us. It's something that couldn't be taken from us when we were stolen, because it lived inside of us. So it stayed there. So I guess it's just a reframing of who we are from like slavery. That's all everybody ever talks about, and I talk about, we need to read more Black books. They're like, oh, slavery. Well, so I wrote 5 chapters about Black American culture, and there's one paragraph about slavery.
Because that is not who we are. That is not who we are. There's so much more to who we are. So thank you for sharing that, just so people can kind of get an idea. So these children's books talk about all these different things throughout the 360 books. You're going to find ones that touch on these different things, because for a child who doesn't have the exposure that many Black adults will have, because not even all Black adults will have it, just depending upon how they were raised or where they were raised. So that's a thing as well, that these things in this soul school is going to teach you and touch your heart as well, which is why I said from the top, I'm going to go back to it and pick up some of these books, because there's always something to learn. But you also talk about in one of the chapters, intangible assets, which are things that we might not be able to really put our hand on or assign a quote unquote value to, but they are a part of who we are and how we are in general. Black people are raised or form a community. One of those things you talk about, I'll just mention it, then I'll let you go, is the fact that so many of us have Southern roots and influences. That's one of the things, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's important, because even though, you were raised in the Midwest, I was raised in the Midwest, but it doesn't matter. If you are Black in America, chances are that your family, wherever you live, has some influence of the American South in how you were raised, or in some of the things and understand. And that's whether you went back to visit relatives down South in the summer on vacations, or whether your family members not too far back migrated from the South. And so that's a great example. Another one is intergenerational bonding. Like, ain't no love like a grandparent love, you know what I mean? And so we tend to be very, very close to grandparents and aunts and uncles, and even great aunts and uncles. And I remember talking to some friends, that I grew up about that. And they were like, I don't talk to my grandma's sisters. Like, that's not a close relative. And I was like, huh? I was like,
right.
That's very close to me. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
That's great aunts, great uncles, or whatever you want to call it. We don't really look at, in the book I talk about, for Black people, like how far you sit away on the family tree isn't a thing for us. It doesn't matter. It's your cousin. All the this many removed and all that, it's your cousin. Right. And then we talk about extended kinship in this chapter. It might not even be your blood cousin.
Right.
But we are very adoptive people. And I think that came from the years where we're communal. We come from a communal society on the continent. And then moving here, having our natural families torn apart, we created our own families. And, we often call that fictive kinship. I want to see that show up in Black children's books, because that's an important part of our culture even now. I remember being good and grown before I realized that some people, they'd be like, well, that's not your real aunt, or that's not your real aunt. Maybe at the family reunion too, like just all up in it, right? And I mean, I think that's a beautiful thing. This came up for me not too long ago when someone said to me, why don't Black people adopt kids more often? And I was like, okay, let me unpack that. We do, but maybe not always on official paper. But I'm like, my grandmother was raising some of everybody. My aunts and uncles had other kids raising each other's kids, raising family members' kids, people in the neighborhood whose mom's going through a rough time. So there are so many unofficial, off the paper, off the record adoptions or fostering or parental guardianships that happen in the Black community that we don't get, government credit for, but we are an adopting people. We're always taking care of each other's kids, so I think that we talk about that. I talk about the African diaspora, and even though this book is focused on Black American culture, you cannot look at Black American culture in a silo. It necessitates that your kids are reading books about people in Africa and the Caribbean and other areas of the world, because we have a lot of similarities and a lot of overlap, for good things, because of good experiences and cultural experiences, and because we've shared a lot of the trauma of the past. And so we bond on that. It talks about our relationship with the land. And then my favorite one is cultural communications and mannerisms and idioms. And it's kind of... it's the idea of the way that we communicate. So not just our language, that was in the last chapter, the words we may use, but the way we may say something. And so like one example, well, there's lots of examples, but the up nod, what's up, like that thing. Give somebody dap, Like my
Mhm.
husband walks in, it doesn't matter. He's never met that guy before. My kids are like, how they all know the same secret handshake? They don't know each other. And I'm like, oh, daddy just dapped them up. You got to let the kids
Yes.
know.
Yes.
And so there's, there are other things, loud talking, where, our older folks are really good at this, where they talking loud enough for the person they intending to hear, but they're
Mhm.
not talking directly to them. It's a form of
Mhm.
communication. It's like, I'm letting you know without being confrontational to you directly, but I know you hear me.
Mhm.
And so these are all things that a lot of us are very familiar with. But I think an important point to bring up is a lot of times we think that, well, Black kids that are around, maybe they go to school with a lot of other Black kids, they'll know all these things. It's
Not
very different now.
necessarily.
You cannot assume that. They'll know a lot of pop culture things,
Right.
but these are those generational things. And because so many of us these days are transplants, you used to be, you lived in the neighborhood and you grew up in that neighborhood, and everybody knew your family, you knew everybody else's family, and they had this intense sense of culture and community. And
Right.
now that's not the case. And so a lot of things that you as the adult may have picked up naturally, you need to, it's an opportunity to pull in these books to help you start conversations of things your kids won't otherwise know.
Right. I love that. And it's because it's funny just thinking about kind of something you said earlier about the fact that kids are going maybe to private schools or things like that. Or maybe because, like you're saying, you live in Atlanta, but just because you live in Atlanta doesn't mean that your neighborhood, you're surrounded by Black people in your neighborhood. So, just the whole fact of being real intentional about making sure that children do learn their history and certain things that if they step into another world, at least they can have a level of familiarity with it. And it's not to say that everybody has to act the same, be the same, because we know we
Nope,
are not a monolith.
that's
Let's be
correct.
clear, but
Yep.
it's just the thing of having that cultural knowledge and awareness. So I do love that you talk about all of those things. And one that we're gonna run out of time, but you also mentioned Black joy because that is
Yes.
important. So in the next chapter, you really talk about history, and
Mm-hmm.
that the history is not just the two things that you and I probably learned about, which would have been quote unquote slavery or enslavement, and then civil rights. There's a whole bunch of other stuff before and after that.
So much. There's so much. And so when this is not Soul School is not just a history book. That's why I said Black American culture. It's all genres, but there are a lot of historical fiction and nonfiction history books in here. And I'm looking for everything. I'm looking for the Tuskegee Airmen and others like them. I'm looking for people who were moving through Reconstruction. So right after the Civil War, what happened to our 40 acres and a mule? I want the
Mm,
kids to know about that. I want them to live, eat, and breathe the Harlem Renaissance, to
yeah.
understand the Great Migration and how, we moved up north for a better life, and it was better, but it wasn't great. And they
Mhm.
need to understand that. And so these are all aspects that you do not get in a regular kind of like history class or whatever. And you know what? That's okay. Because I mean, it's not okay, but yelling and screaming, they're not trying to change it. In fact, they're trying to take more of it away. So the
Absolutely.
way that we combat that in the most immediate sense is to fill in those gaps ourselves. And we're more than equipped to do that. So that's what that chapter is about. It's called the pain and the pride. It's the pain of the past. Those things have to be discussed. There's no way around it. But
Mhm.
also the pride of the past. It's not just all sad trauma. That's not
Right.
all that there is to it. We are creative, and that brings in that Black joy. It makes people really mad, because it's something that can't take away from us. You can
Mhm.
do this and you can do that and you can say this and you can say that, and we still gonna have fun tonight. And that
Exactly.
just really makes people mad. And it doesn't mean that we're ignoring the sadness or the trauma. What we're saying is there's still a part of us that you can't reach,
Right.
that is protected, a protected space that we can open up and tap into. That's how we survived, the things that we've survived, and it's how we continue to thrive. Is this Black joy?
It's Black joy. That's right. And then the last two, I'm going to kind of link them together just so we can have time for you to
Yep.
share some books with us. But you also talk about birds with wings and basically just different types of books. And you've already kind of touched upon that
Yeah.
a little bit, that, there are, what should I say, nonfiction books. There's fiction, there's poetry, there is historical fiction, there's romance, there's graphic novels. There's just so many different ways that stories can be told.
Yes. That's what that chapter is about. You summed it up perfectly.
Yes, yes. And I, like you, I love some what do you call it? Historical fiction. I love the historical fiction.
It's so good.
Yes. When I first started doing BGC Book Club almost 5 years ago, I personally loved a whole lot of, like contemporary fiction and things like that. But now historical fiction is my jam. I mean, I do it all here. So some of the things that you've mentioned, I've had women, come on and talk about all different types of books, but my jam is the historical fiction. So I love that. And that you have books that children can read that are also historical fiction.
Absolutely. That kind of connects to that last chapter of
it
the
does.
book with the idea. I get a lot of the things I wouldn't normally read from my book club. So I'm in a book club. We call it Maroon Moms, and we actually meet this coming weekend. And we're doing a thriller, the book that we're doing. And that's just not my thing. I'm one of the older moms in the group, and that's totally fine, or older women in the group. And so sometimes the young folks who put me on, I'm like, a thriller. I said, so it's gonna be scary, y'all. But I still read it, and it's so good. And so I feel like my book club has really opened, expanded my reading life, because otherwise I would just always stay in the genres I enjoy most and I'm most comfortable with. But because other people get to pick the books, I'm forced to read other things, and I'm never disappointed. Even if I think, well, I'm probably not gonna keep going down that series, or I might not read it, I'm always glad that I stepped outside of my comfort zone.
And you encourage parents to do that with their children as well, to let them read different types of books. One thing we didn't mention, though, is like Afrofuturism or African futurism, or whatever the term is. But that's something as well, to be able to just think of what a future would look like. And like, for those of us adults, we might be thinking of Octavia Butler, for example, but there are authors that are writing those types of books as well, that we can envision what a Black future would look like, or, or things that might be fantasy, what does it look like in a fantasy world, all of that. So I love it.
For sure. That's one of my daughter's favorite genres is fantasy.
Really? It's fantasy.
Oh my gosh. She's all into it, and she likes scary books too. So she likes books that have like ghosts in it and stuff like that, and paints and all that. So that's not my favorite kind, but I've enjoyed them with her.
Right. I love that. I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything in like building a literary life, because that is something that is important. And what do you mean by a literary life? Of course, we already talked about book clubs and things like that. But what do you mean by
book club is one part of it. I'd say a book club is a way of formalizing that, to kind of bring structure to it. But even without a book club, a literary life is really this idea that you have a life where you think of books as friends. It's not because you have to do it or you gotta do this now. Forget everything that you ever felt you were forced to read, and switch over to like, you get to read this. And I noticed that a lot of people say, well, I don't ever have time. I don't have time to read. And I always think to myself, that's because you're thinking of like a block of time where you're going to sit down and read. It might not be like that. It might not be your literary life. You might be reading in snatches. I mean, like, keep it real. You keep a book in the bathroom, and you can keep your Kindle in your purse, or whatever, and it might be 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, a snatch of time here and there. But if you get reading really something good, you'll make new time for it. Also, you can look at your life and say, maybe this is something you intentionally want to do, and so you're going to change something. For me, about 10 years ago, I gave up watching TV. And I took that time on my shows and everything like that, and I put them towards reading, and my reading life burst forth. Now, I
Mm.
don't believe in like hard and fast rules or things like that. So, like, if my husband's like, "Hey, babe, watch this movie with me Friday night," absolutely, sure. I would love to do that and snuggle up and watch a movie, but I don't have any like shows that I watch. I just don't
Right.
get into it because I realized the amount of hours in a year that I was spending watching TV. And I wasn't even a big, huge avid TV, watcher, but still. So I chose to do that. That might, somebody else might be like, no, that's crazy, I'm not doing that, but maybe there's something else for you. Maybe it's Saturday morning when you have your coffee, you just read for a little bit. So I would say don't underestimate the stolen moments, and then prioritize reading aloud. So I started doing that because my kids couldn't read, but kids can understand at a much higher level than what they themselves can read.
Mm.
So when you talk about, even in this book, when people are seeing the books I'm recommending for ages 2 to 4, and they're like, kids can't read. I was like, well, they generally can't read anything at that age, right? But they understand
You can
when you're reading to them, and they pick up just enough of what they're supposed to pick up from it, and they might get more the next reading around. But I still read aloud to my kids, and my oldest two are teens. We always have a family read aloud going, like a good juicy book. This is not the
I
time to
love it.
make them memorize the presidents. I mean, a juicy book where they're like, "Come on, mama, we got to finish up dinner so we can get back to the book." And then the last thing I'll say about a literary life is reading multiple books at a time. I never used to do that. If I'm reading this book, I just read that book from start to finish. And what happens then, you might have time to read, but you're not in the mood for that book, so you don't read.
Right.
So I saw this, someone talking about this, and I started keeping multiple books going at a time, a kind of heavy book, or a lighter book, and maybe a fiction, nonfiction, or maybe a poetry book, so that no matter what mood I'm in,
Yes.
I have something I can grab and move forward with. So those
Mm.
are just a few of the ideas, but a literary life starts with an attitude. It's not about having a lot of books. You can just use a library card. You don't have to own any books to have a literary life. It's
Mhm.
about choosing to be a reader and kind of
Mhm.
moving forward from there.
I love that. And you didn't mention it, but audios, because audiobooks are
Oh my
good.
gosh. I live in audiobooks. Are you kidding me? I have an Audible subscription, which is like my little treat to myself because it's pricey for me. But Libby, which is our library app to get audiobooks, oh, I burn Libby up. If she was something you could look at, it'd be all beat up and bruised. I use that thing so much. My whole family, people don't realize you can also download books directly to the Kindle. So all my kids have Kindles. We have a lot of hard copy books in our house, but they all have Kindles, and I just shoot those books straight from the library within 30 seconds onto their Kindles. It's amazing.
Mhm. Yeah. So if you want to read, there's no reason why you shouldn't. There's no reason why
Mm,
you shouldn't. So for this last few minutes that we have together, I do just, because as I said, we feature Black women writers here, and we can't share all 360, obviously, but if there are like, for certain age categories or just certain Black women authors that you think have like really great books that maybe we could share with our children, please let us know who some of them are, and then
okay.
you won't have to get the book to get all of it, all of the good, but
Yep.
just give us a few ideas or suggestions.
Okay, so I'm going to start with teens because so often in conversations about kids, we only start with little kids. So, teens, there is a second helpings book called The Davenports. It's by Crystal Marquise, and the second one just came out not too long ago. And what I love about this, it's about some sisters and also a young lady who works in their home, but they are wealthy and they are free. And that is so rare. So it's historical fiction, but they are not enslaved. Their family has money, and these ladies are pursuing. It's kind of a coming of age story.
Mhm.
So it reminds me of like a little bit of our own little version of maybe the Little Women. You have these sisters, and they're kind of dating and figuring out who they are and who they want to become. And there's a little bit of suspense. There's romance. There's family love. Um, and you get a chance to see what life was like in the early 1900s for a Black family that had means, and what kinds of
Mhm.
things they did and how they spent their time. And I love that these young ladies are protected. they are cherished and they are seen as valuable. And so I have to put that up there as like one of my favorite books for me, but I
Right.
share it with my teens, right? But I loved that book for myself.
Yes, and I
Um,
like that you mentioned that particular one because Crystal Marquis, every year at the end of the year, I do a BGC Book Club, like best of the year, that people get to
okay.
vote on them in a variety of categories. And in the young adult category, actually, Crystal Marquis won the last 2 years. She was one of the top people because of
Okay.
this series. So yeah, that's a good choice. That's why I was smiling so big.
Okay. I love that then. That was deserving, I think. For the middle schoolers, I'm going to pick another historical fiction book that goes further back. It's called 40 Acres and Maybe a Mule. It's an older book. So here, Soul School has some new contemporary books that were new releases when I was writing, but I also went back into the history of books that we don't talk about as much. Harriet Gilliam Robinette, and this is at the end of the Civil War. So the Civil War just ended, and there are two formerly enslaved brothers who set out in search of a freedmen's bureau because they're trying to claim their 40 acres and a mule. And this story goes on and talks about how they end up connecting with other people and forming a fictive kinship. They've formed a family with other people they're not blood relatives, a chosen family, and they begin to live and thrive together on farmland and build a life and a world for themselves. And that story is just really powerful because it talks of this unique time right after the Civil War. We usually don't talk about that much. It's like we talk about the Civil War and then we go to the Civil Rights Movement. And it talks about what was promised, what we didn't receive, and how we maneuvered around it to the best of our ability. So that's what I would say for middle schoolers. And then for the elementary schoolers, that one is so hard, but I'm going to have to say A Walk in the Woods. And this book is, there's a story behind the story. So the book is about a boy whose dad dies, and he leaves him like a little map. So he can go and follow this map through the woods that he used to travel in with his dad. And when he gets to kind of X marks the spot, there is a group of drawings, like sketchings of like woodland animals that his father had drawn when he was his age, when he was a little boy. And it's like his dad knew that in his absence that his son would need that walk through the woods and that he would need to have this piece of him. That, the boy hadn't seen the drawings before. So that in and of itself is written by Nikki Grimes, who's like a superstar.
Yes.
And illustrated by Jerry Pinkney and Brian Pinkney. And this really, they're both illustrate children's books, a father-son duo. Jerry's the son, Brian Jerry's the father, Brian the son. But I was like, they don't usually draw together. So I looked that up to figure out, just curious. And here's what happened. Jerry started, and he sketched all the pictures and passed away before he finished them. And his son picked up the mantle and finished the pictures to go with Nikki's words. And I was like, that is art coming to life. Because the book is about a little boy who heals when his dad is lost. And here Brian comes and finishes these illustrations that his dad, Jerry, started. I was done. I was like, I am done. So that is one of my favorite, children's picture books because of the double story.
Yes. I love that. And there are just so many superstars out there, like you mentioned, like rock stars. And I can think of some like Jacqueline Woodson, who's written a whole lot of books. Like recently,
and I have to say, she wrote an endorsement for Soul School on the back.
Sure did.
Yes, that was like the best day of my life last year.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I had forgotten. And she says, here is the literary Bible for every parent, teacher, student, auntie who wants a deeper understanding of why our books matter. Timely and timeless. And for those of you who may not know, she's written a ton of books for young people and children. I think she has 1 or 2 adult books as well, but Brown Girl Dreaming is one that she's really known for. And actually, You can't see it. I have it back here. I got like the 10-year or 20-year, whatever it was,
Yeah.
special edition of it back here. So yes, as I said, I read these books as well. So another person who also left you a blurb, Alice Faye Duncan, she's written a lot of books as well.
Yeah.
She says Soul School will impact learning and inspire students to pursue life in the spirit of joy.
Yeah. She's a former teacher and librarian. And then Jabari Assim, he's a professor now and a writer. He's written multiple books, but he also used to be the editor of the Crisis magazine, the NAACP magazine. So I felt like, I knew this book was important, but when people that who know their books, their children's books, were, when they were willing to like lend their hand and take a look at it and let us know what they thought, I was like, okay, this is going to take off.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And I would be remiss if I did not mention Coretta Scott King because of the awards that are given for children's books. So just tell us a little bit about that, because some people might not even be aware that she did that.
Yeah, so the American Library Association has, they have the Newbery Awards and the Caldecott Awards and all these different children's book awards, but there's also the Coretta Scott King Award. And so going to author and illustrator, and they also have like a new author, someone who's written like their first book. And these are huge honors for these Black stories. And so just like somebody may go and like, oh, let me see who all the Newbery honor books are this year, Newbery Award books. That's the same thing we should be doing with the Coretta Scott King books. Like, let me see who got these books and, what they're doing and who's getting it. So it is a huge honor for the authors and for the illustrators. And like this year, Jason Reynolds' newest book. And I got a chance to meet him when he came to Atlanta. I was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. I went to his book signing, our book talk. So he was honored. The book awards for the new year just came out last week, so people can hop on those.
Yes. I had to mention that because that's pretty big that, those awards and Coretta Scott King, because we know all these other things about Coretta Scott King, right? Or maybe we don't know. There's a book about her in here as well. Yeah. People oftentimes you just think of her as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife. But she was so much more than that. So it's just this is why this book is important, and that's why it's so critical that we are on the lookout for not just this book that gives us 360, but once you get to this 360, you can keep going because Amber couldn't include every book in here, right? So there's so many, and they're coming out every Tuesday, and sometimes in between if people do independent publishing. But it's just important, especially in times like these. I mean, it's always important, but especially in times like these, when there are so many efforts to do away with our history and to take certain things out of the books. Not that what was in the big books was accurate anyway, but there are just so many.
So this is not a time to be complacent. It's a time to lean in and to be intentional about what we know we want for ourselves and for our community of children.
Yes. And as Amber said, and I concur, this isn't just for the kids, this is for us too. Because for someone like me who did not grow up reading books by Black authors, the first book I really remember reading specifically by a Black woman writer was The Color Purple, and that was my first year of college. So for me, it's meaningful to be able to see these books and go back, and because yes, it's about the representation, but I also feel it's also about the exposure and the knowledge of where we've been, where we are, and what we can be. So this is just Soul School is like probably, I'm going to say it, one of the most important books of this year. I'm just going to say it just because of what it's talking about. So
thank you so much. Thank you.
I will stand up. Y'all won't be able to see me. Standing ovation. Thank you. So, are there any places or spaces, here in Atlanta or, around the world, around the United States, where you will be going out to share this book or do signings or anything like that we can be on the lookout for?
Yes, I have something coming up soon. We're solidifying the date at Brave and Kind bookstore. It's a Black-owned bookstore in Decatur, Georgia. Love it. Full of children's books, all these types of books, and they have adult books too. So that'll be announced on my website and social media soon. But I have a page on my website if people go there, and it has all my speaking engagements for the year, and it's constantly being updated. So I know I'll be in Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. I'll be in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I'll be in California. So just I travel all over the country speaking. I'll be in Kentucky and Georgia, in the St. Simon's Island in the summer.
Okay.
Speaking. So I'll just be all over, and I would love to meet people.
All right. Yes, St. Simon's is not too far from where my mom lives. So, hey, maybe my mom will come check you out.
I'll be ready.
But thank you so much. Thank you so much. And of course, I suggest you pick up this book wherever you can. I'm going to do a little plug here because there is a Brown Girl Collective bookstore, which is attached to the bookshop platform. So, but if you type in Brown Girl Collective bookstore, it'll take you directly to the page. And this book is listed there. So if you want to go ahead and grab a copy or 2 or 12, because people need to see this and share it. And as I've already stated, it's not, yes, there are things in here that you're just reading for information, but then there is all of the different books. There are, if you decide to purchase if you decide to read a particular book, there are questions that you can ask, activities, all that sort of thing. So it really is a great resource. So please go ahead and pick up a copy of Soul School wherever you can. All right, we've got a long comment. I'm gonna do my best to read.
I read the comments. I've been keeping up with them. So
okay, this one is long. It says, this was such a treat to watch. Thank you so much for having this discussion and allowing us to be a part of it. Soul School was life transforming for this homeschooling mama of 5. Y'all go ahead with the homeschooling. Thank you for having my children to see themselves through windows and mirrors of these wonderful books. I appreciate you more than you know. Looking forward to reading Soul School and expanding our home library. Yes, thank you for the beautiful comment, Gina Williams-Walker. Thank you. We appreciate you. We appreciate you. So that is it for today. Again, everyone, now is a perfect time to grab this so you can load up for Black History Month. And, have multiple books to read for this month and beyond. So thank you all for being here. Amber, thank you for being here. I'm going to let you go grab a sip of water, but please don't hang up yet. I just want to tell everybody what's happening next week, but it'll be real good. All right, and thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you here in the ATL.
For sure.
All right, then take good care. All right, that was a lot of fun. As soon as I heard about this book, I knew that I had to tap in because, as I stated, I'm big and grown. At my big age, I still love reading children's books. I got some back here, and now, thanks to Amber, what you see here is going to get expanded with a whole bunch of children's books as well, so I can share, I can read and learn for myself and then just share with the people that I love in the community. So thank you all for being here and being a part of this conversation. Go ahead and grab a copy of Soul School. Go ahead and share it with others and all of that. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Just as a point of announcement, next week I will be having the night before the publication preview of Nancy Johnston's People of Means. So be here next week on Monday, which is the 10th at 8:00 p.m. for a conversation with Nancy Johnston about her new book, People of Means, which will be coming out the following day. So we will get a little sneak peek of what that book is and what that's all about. So please continue to follow here on Brown Girl Collective, especially on YouTube. Follow there, but of course you can find us on other social media as well. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. And very, very soon, take good care of yourselves and have a great week.